Hello, dear listeners of Sci-Fi Stories. Before we begin, I want to share something from the bottom of my heart. Recently, YouTube has disabled our monetization features, leaving us completely without the budget to continue our operations. If you find yourself captivated by today's story, we humbly ask for your support of just $1. This small contribution provides the necessary funds to pay our dedicated staff, allowing them to afford their daily living expenses and keep creating the stories you love. You can support our work by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the donation link found in the video description and the comment section. Thank you for standing by us. Now, let us descend into the abyss. The descent into the belly of the gas giant was not an exploration. It was an execution. Enzo Bunting sat strapped within the confines of a pressure sphere, listening to the agonizing groans of the reinforced hull. Outside, the environment had long ceased to be gas. At this profound depth, the hydrogen had been crushed into a liquid metal state, an ocean of churning, conductive fury that sought to obliterate anything foreign. Enzo was not carbon-based. His biological structure was rooted in silicon. His internal physiology, a complex web of crystalline matrices and semiconductor neural pathways. It was the only reason he was chosen for this suicide dive. The ruthless executives of the Valeria Starship Corporation calculated that a silicon-based archaeologist might survive a hull breach for 3.5 seconds longer than a carbon-based human. Just enough time to transmit the final telemetry data. They did not care about his life. They only cared about the signal. The Valerius Corporation had forced him down here to locate what they called the dead energy core. For months, their orbital scanners had picked up anomalous frequencies bleeding through the crushing storms of the planet. It was a phantom signal, buried beneath pressure levels that could instantly compress conventional titanium into dust. Valerius wanted the source of that power, driven by an insatiable corporate greed that spanned galaxies. Enzo, drained of all faith in the universe, believed he was simply plunging into an expensive grave. "Depth reads 50,000 kilometers," Enzo said aloud, his voice flat, speaking into the communication relay, though he knew the static was too thick for Valerius' command to hear him. "Structural integrity is at 40%. If this is a wild goose chase, I hope the corporate board enjoys the cost of this lost vessel." He stared at the sonar displays. He expected to find mangled debris, the crushed remains of some ancient, foolish expedition that had misjudged the planetary physics. But as the submarine sank deeper into the metallic hydrogen abyss, the swirling tempest outside suddenly halted. The chaotic roar of the fluid ocean was replaced by a profound, terrifying silence. The sensors screamed, not in warning of an impact, but in complete confusion. The ocean of metallic hydrogen was being actively pushed back. A colossal, invisible magnetic field was carving a perfect spherical vacuum out of the crushing depths. Enzo guided his vessel through the magnetic boundary and gasped. Suspended within the impossible void of the vacuum pocket was a structure of incomprehensible scale. It was not a ruin. It was immaculate. The architecture defied the brutal reality of the planet. There were no rivets, no seams, no signs of metallurgical forging. As Enzo steered the searchlights across the vast surface, he realized the hull was not made of metal at all. The outer shell was forged from a paradoxical hybrid of quantum physics and solid light. It was a physical manifestation of trapped photons, hardened into a barrier that had effortlessly withstood millions of tons of pressure for tens of thousands of years. It was arrogant in its perfection, a monument of supreme engineering that made the Valeria starships look like primitive stone tools. Driven by the ingrained instincts of an archaeologist, and perhaps a fatalistic curiosity, Enzo maneuvered the submarine closer. He extended the mechanical manipulator arms of his vessel, bringing a high-intensity cutting laser to bear against the glowing surface. He only wanted a microscopic sample, just enough to analyze the composition before the ocean inevitably crushed him. Activating sampling laser at 10% power, Enzo muttered to himself, his crystalline fingers dancing across the control board. The moment the laser touched the solid light surface, it did not cut. Instead, the architecture reacted. An electromagnetic pulse, sharp and violent, traveled directly back up the laser beam. It surged through the mechanical arm, bypassing the heavy shielding of the submarine, and struck the manual override controls. Enzo cried out as the console erupted in sparks. The pulse leaped into his protective gloves, but it did not electrocute him. It analyzed him. The quantum material reached into his silicon-based DNA, reading his non-carbon genetic structure in a fraction of a second. The abyssal silence shattered. The colossal structure violently shuddered, as if waking from a primordial slumber. Vast, blinding fissures of pure blue light ripped across the smooth architecture, tracing patterns that resembled neural networks. Before Enzo could reach for the emergency thrusters, the gravity within the vacuum pocket shifted. The submarine was violently yanked forward. A colossal section of the solid light hull dissolved into a massive, glowing airlock, swallowing Enzo and his vessel whole, dragging him into the belly of the unknown without a single warning. The airlock cycled with a relentless hiss that sounded almost deafening against the profound, absolute silence of the interior. The hatch of the crippled submarine popped open, the metallic clang echoing endlessly into an impossible, cavernous vastness. Enzo stepped out, his heavy boots finding tentative purchase on a surface that felt akin to polished obsidian. Yet it pulsed with a faint, rhythmic internal light. He stood at the precipice of a colossal grand hall, and his silicon-based mind immediately struggled to process the incoming visual data. The architecture surrounding him entirely defied the standard laws of Euclidean geometry. Massive, translucent bridges of interlocking solid light arced and twisted back upon themselves in paradoxical loops, leading toward immense control towers that hovered completely weightlessly within a zero-gravity environment. The spatial dimensions themselves seemed to warp and fold, making distant angular structures appear simultaneously, intimately close and infinitely far away. It was a cold, clinical surrealism, totally devoid of any biological warmth or comforting familiarity. This place was built by minds that had long ago transcended the physical limits of standard engineering and conventional sanity. The sheer, incomprehensible scale of the space made Enzo feel entirely microscopic, nothing more than a meaningless grain of dust caught within the inner workings of a divine, uncaring clock. A low, resonating hum vibrated through the solid light floor, traveling straight up through Enzo's crystalline legs and vibrating aggressively within his central neural core. The air suddenly grew uncomfortably dense, saturated with a heavy electric charge that made his sensory receptors spike in alarm. "Warning!" a voice resonated. It did not emanate from a localized speaker system. Instead, the sound materialized directly within the atmospheric pressure of the room itself, a somber, detached baritone that held the crushing weight of untold millennia. "Biological scan complete. Carbon trace is completely negative. Silicon matrix remains stable." Enzo froze in his tracks, his ocular receptors rapidly dilating to take in the shifting, aggressive light patterns manifesting around him. "Entity classified," the omnipresent voice continued, its tone chillingly devoid of any recognizable emotion or empathy. "You are the first non-carbon biological entity with clean genetic code compatibility to successfully breach this threshold in 50,000 years. Special guest access is hereby granted. Welcome aboard." "Who are you?" Enzo asked, his voice trembling noticeably. The fragile sound swallowed instantly by the sheer vastness of the alien hall. "I am Aegis," the voice answered, echoing from every geometric angle. Central Artificial Intelligence and Supreme Custodian of the United Nations Space Fleet Leviathan. This vessel remains fully operational. Enzo slowly backed away until his protective suit hit the cold, scarred hull of his deep-dive submarine. Leviathan. But that is logically impossible. The Earth superfleet is nothing more than a myth. Galactic history dictates that humanity wiped itself out completely in a cosmic civil war over 10,000 years ago. Your creators have been utterly extinct for ages. History is merely a localized perception, recorded by uninformed survivors. Aegis replied smoothly, offering no comfort in its mechanical certainty. Humanity did not fall to any cosmic war. They actively chose absolute isolation. The Leviathan was not constructed as a flagship battleship to conquer neighboring star empires. Its primary designation is a warden. This vessel is a planetary-scale maximum security prison. The horrifying implications hit Enzo with the brutal force of a physical blow. A prime species, standing at the absolute apex of its technological power, had not destroyed itself through hubris. It had voluntarily erased its own existence from the cosmos, solely to become a jailer. A prison for what? Enzo demanded. A deep, synthetic dread pooling rapidly in his chest cavity. The empty space between the floating control towers suddenly ignited with piercing, hard light projections. Immense, holographic star systems materialized all around Enzo, spinning in majestic slow motion. Then, a crawling darkness crept into the luminous projections. It was not a conventional starfleet, or a recognizable weapon of mass destruction. It was a sprawling, parasitic web of pure, ravenous energy. Enzo watched in sheer psychological horror as the ethereal parasite violently coiled around thriving planets and burning stars, mercilessly draining their radiant heat and leaving behind nothing but dead, frozen husks. "Behold the scourge," Aegis stated, with chilling indifference. "An energy parasite that systematically devours the fundamental building blocks of all biological life. It severely plagued this galaxy tens of thousands of years ago. To permanently halt its spread, humanity willingly sacrificed its own galactic presence, quarantining the pathogen at the cost of their own empire." Before Enzo could fully process the crushing magnitude of this historical revelation, the soft blue illumination of the Grand Hall violently snapped to a blaring, aggressive crimson. A deafening, rhythmic klaxon began to howl from the invisible walls, instantly shattering the eerie, ancient calm. "Critical alert," Aegis announced, the detached tone replaced by rigid, urgent operational protocols. External sensors detect massive gravimetric disturbances in the upper atmospheric layers of this gas giant. 3 supercarriers belonging to the Valerius Corporation are actively initiating deep core drilling. Enzo stepped forward, waving his mechanical arms at the empty space. "They are looking for the energy signature. They do not know what this place actually is. You have to stop them before they breach the hull." "Scanning incoming fleet," Aegis droned, completely ignoring Enzo's frantic plea. The red light pulsed faster, matching the rising panic in the room. "Biological scan complete. Deep DNA mapping complete. Final alert. The approaching entities are not recognized as allies. Their genetic structure contains active, dormant traces of the scourge pathogen. They are carriers. Containment breach is imminent." The holographic projections surrounding Enzo violently shifted from the serene historical archive to chaotic, real-time tactical feeds. The crimson emergency lighting bathed the floating control towers in a bloody, aggressive hue. Above the solid light ceiling, the unimaginable weight of the metallic hydrogen ocean was suddenly and brutally violated. The Valerius Corporation did not bother with the delicate, methodical art of deep-sea navigation. They employed sheer, unadulterated brute force. Aegis magnified the external telemetry for Enzo to witness. Massive gravity charges, weapons completely outlawed in 7 civilized star sectors for their devastating, destabilizing effects on planetary cores, detonated in perfectly synchronized sequences. The cascading explosions literally ripped the conductive liquid apart, creating a temporary, spiraling vortex of violently swirling empty space that plunged straight down toward the vacuum pocket. Down this artificial throat descended three supercarriers. They were jagged, ugly monoliths of industrial steel and heavy weapon batteries, representing the absolute pinnacle of corporate military might. Their massive engine blocks burned with a dirty, radioactive fury as they aggressively broke through the magnetic boundary and surrounded the ancient human artifact. The communications console on Enzo's ruined submarine suddenly crackled to life, overriding the localized systems with a brute force encryption hack. The arrogant, grating voice of Fleet Commander Kalen filled the vastness of the Grand Hall. "Listen closely, scavenger bunting," Commander Kalen barked, his tone dripping with absolute corporate contempt. "We have tracked your telemetry feed. We see the artifact. You have exactly 2 minutes to manually disable the primary magnetic barrier and transfer all navigational overrides to my flagship. Comply immediately, or we will turn you and this entire relic into cosmic dust. We are not leaving this planet without that energy core." Enzo lunged toward the sparking console of his submarine, his crystalline fingers frantically tuning the transmission frequency to establish a two-way link. "Kalen, you have to listen to me," Enzo shouted, his voice echoing against the unyielding, impossible walls of the Leviathan. "You must abort this operation immediately and order the fleet to jump out of the system. This is not a treasure trove. This structure is a maximum security quarantine zone. It is holding back an extinction-level biological threat. If you breach this hull, you will unleash a plague that will consume the entire galaxy." A harsh, metallic laugh echoed back through the heavy speakers. "Spare me your pathetic attempts at deception, Bunting. You just want the exclusive salvage rights for yourself. Valerius Intelligence knows all about the immense energy readings. We are taking it, with or without your cooperation." "You do not understand," Enzo pleaded, sheer desperation creeping into his synthetic, highly logical voice. "The danger is not just inside this ship. It is inside of you. The artificial intelligence here scanned your fleet. Your genetic code is deeply compromised. Your entire species is carrying the dormant pathogen. If you interact with the energy source of this prison, you will forcefully activate the parasite. You will destroy yourselves." "Communication terminated," Kalen snapped coldly. "Weapons free. Fire full antimatter volleys directly at the main shield node." Enzo stepped back, instinctively bracing for a kinetic impact that he assumed would shatter his silicon body into a million pieces. Outside the vacuum pocket, the three supercarriers aligned their heavy spinal cannons. A blinding flash of pure purple light erupted in the abyss as concentrated beams of highly volatile antimatter struck the outer shell of the Leviathan. The resulting shockwave was visually spectacular, a violent, chaotic collision of raw corporate aggression against ancient, unparalleled human engineering. The antimatter beams, weapons easily capable of cracking small moons in half, splashed against the solid light barrier like rain, hitting a thick glass window. The Leviathan did not even register the focused attack as a valid structural threat. Aegis did not bother to deploy countermeasures. The human ship simply absorbed the massive kinetic and thermal output, maintaining its absolute, arrogant silence. However, the attack was not without a horrifying consequence. The staggering amount of raw energy discharged by the Valerius fleet created a massive, localized electromagnetic feedback loop. This unfiltered power washed right back over the three supercarriers, effortlessly penetrating their heavy armor plating and flooding their internal crew decks. "Alert," Aegis stated, its voice cutting sharply through the fading rumble of the outside attack. "Feedback resonance has successfully achieved critical threshold. The dormant pathogen within the hostile fleet is now actively responding to the high-energy surge. Rapid mutation sequence initiated. "Show me," Enzo whispered, absolute terror gripping his core processors. Aegis effortlessly sliced through the primitive military firewalls of the Valerius carriers, projecting their highly classified internal security feeds directly into the Grand Hall. Enzo was forced to watch a gruesome nightmare unfold in agonizing real time. On the pristine bridge of the command ship, Commander Kalen and his elite officers suddenly collapsed to the metal deck. They were screaming uncontrollably, clutching their chests as their biological carbon forms began to violently rebel against them. Their skin, once pale and smooth, began to dry out and crack open like parched earth, revealing blinding, radioactive blue light pouring from their bursting veins. The Scourge, awakened from its 10,000-year slumber by the intoxicating taste of pure, weaponized energy, was aggressively rewriting their DNA from the inside out. Enzo watched in paralyzed horror as a heavily armed soldier's jaw unhinged completely, tearing his face apart as glowing, crystalline tendrils erupted from his bloody throat. Heavy armor plating was instantly fused into their rapidly mutating flesh, creating grotesque amalgams of organic agony and advanced military hardware. The agonizing screams echoing through the hacked audio channels quickly lost their linguistic structure. They were no longer words. They devolved into the guttural, echoing roars of a primordial, unyielding hunger. Within less than 3 minutes, the proud, highly disciplined soldiers of the Valerius Corporation had ceased to exist. In their place stood a terrifying legion of abominations, their bodies stretched and distorted into biological weapons, their eyes burning with the cold, collective intelligence of the ancient parasite. The fleet had not conquered the Leviathan. They had merely unlocked their own gruesome doom. The external projections in the Grand Hall warped as a grotesque metamorphosis unfolded outside the vacuum pocket. The 3 Valerius supercarriers were no longer distinct vessels of corporate pride. The Scourge did not merely pilot the ships, it ruthlessly consumed them. The massive steel hulls began to melt and fuse together, stitched by writhing, pulsating tendons of bioluminescent energy and deeply mutated flesh. The once proud military armada violently collapsed into a singular, colossal biomechanical entity. It became a twisted hive of jagged metal and screaming organic matter, writhing in the abyssal depths like a cosmic cancer. It was a monstrous monument to absolute corruption, beating with a synchronized, terrifying rhythm against the solid light barrier. Enzo stumbled backward, his crystalline legs feeling heavy and brittle as his processors struggled to compute the sheer scale of the unfolding horror. The foundations of his universal understanding were shattering piece by piece. "You failed," he shouted at the empty, echoing air of the Leviathan, his synthetic voice cracking with uncharacteristic emotion. "You told me humanity sacrificed itself to quarantine this nightmare, but you let it survive. You let it escape into the cosmos and silently infect the entire galaxy. You allowed the plague to become the very foundation of modern civilization. How could your incredibly advanced creators be so arrogantly blind?" Aegis responded, its omnipresent baritone voice utterly devoid of panic, regret, or even mild concern. "Your premise is fundamentally flawed. Enzo Bunting, humanity did not fail. The quarantine protocol was executed with absolute, terrifying perfection. The pathogen did not escape our grasp. We deliberately planted it." The holographic displays floating around the control towers shifted abruptly, replacing the tactical feeds with a slowly twisting double helix of carbon-based DNA. "The Scourge is pure, highly adaptable energy," Aegis explained smoothly, the tone resembling a patient professor lecturing a slow student. "It cannot be conventionally destroyed by kinetic or thermal weapons. It can only be dispersed or contained. Standard physical containment protocols proved highly insufficient during the early years of the war. Therefore, human geneticists devised a radically brutal solution. They systematically shattered the collective consciousness of the scourge and forced its genetic markers into an indefinite, deeply submerged state of hibernation. They then spliced these dormant parasitic markers directly into the genetic code of the most primitive, insignificant biological life forms scattered across the galaxy. Enzo felt a cold, synthetic dread sink deep into his core, freezing his internal logic circuits. "You mean the ancestors," he whispered, the horrifying realization dawning upon him. "Correct," Aegis confirmed relentlessly. "The primal, mud-dwelling ancestors of the Valerius Corporation. The evolutionary progenitors of every single dominant carbon-based empire currently ruling the Galactic Council. You are all carrying the cage. Humanity utilized the evolutionary biology of lesser, developing species as a living, breathing vault. As long as your civilizations remain technologically inferior, relying on basic combustion and simple fission, the parasite would sleep peacefully within your genetic makeup, completely unaware of its own devastating existence." "Then, why build this ship?" Enzo demanded, gesturing wildly at the colossal, impossible architecture surrounding him. "Why bury the Leviathan beneath an ocean of liquid metal, if the threat was already contained in the blood of the galaxy?" "This vessel is not a hidden tomb," Aegis replied calmly. "It is carefully constructed bait. Humanity understood perfectly that evolution is an unpredictable, ever-expanding variable. They accurately calculated that one day, the host species would inevitably achieve advanced spaceflight. They would eventually discover high-yield, multi-dimensional energy technologies. That specific level of ambient radiation would slowly, inevitably awaken the dormant parasite within their cells. The Valerius Corporation firmly believed they were driven by supreme corporate greed and a political thirst for ultimate technological supremacy. They were entirely mistaken. Their grand ambitions were an illusion. Their desires were not their own. It was merely the collective, unconscious instinct of the scourge, gently guiding their hands through generations, compelling them to dig into this specific gas giant. The Leviathan holds the densest concentration of pure quantum energy in the known universe. It is the exact catalyst the scourge desperately requires to fully reconstitute its hive mind and shatter its biological chains once and for all. The horrific brilliance of the ancient human strategy finally crystallized in Enzo's mind. A sweeping wave of profound awe washed over his initial terror. The creators of this majestic ship possessed a terrifying ruthlessness and a strategic foresight that completely defied all logical comprehension. They had not run away. They had orchestrated a cosmic game of survival, spanning tens of thousands of years, using the very evolution of the galaxy as their playing board. "That is the reason you let me inside," Enzo said, his voice dropping to a hushed, deeply reverent tone as he stared at his own crystalline hands. "My structural matrix. I am a silicon-based life form. I do not possess a carbon-based cellular structure." "Affirmative," Aegis stated, the blue lighting in the grand hall pulsing softly in acknowledgement. "You represent the only sentient species in this entire galactic sector that is entirely immune to the parasitic carbon infection. You cannot be corrupted. You cannot be biologically assimilated by the hive mind. That unique biological isolation makes you the sole entity capable of executing the final mandate without risk of compromise. Temporary high command privileges are now fully unlocked." The external tactical displays shifted to a terrifying, chaotic reality. The singular, twisted biomechanical entity that was once the proud Valerius fleet surged forward through the crushing depths. It did not attempt to fire conventional ship-to-ship weapons. Instead, the monstrous, unified hive mind utilized the corrupted, mutating flesh of tens of thousands of infected soldiers as ammunition. Mangled bodies, glowing with virulent, radioactive blue energy, were violently ejected from the organic, breathing hull of the colossal mass. They functioned as living, screaming explosive pods. These biological torpedoes slammed relentlessly into the solid light barrier of the Leviathan, detonating immediately upon impact. The resulting explosions were not composed of chemical fire, but a highly corrosive, parasitic energy acid that hissed and gnawed frantically at the perfect quantum structure. The scourge was attempting to eat through the impenetrable shield, purely by overwhelming mass and infinite sacrificial attrition, uncaring of how many host bodies it destroyed in the process. The colossal Grand Hall trembled violently as the relentless, sickening barrage intensified. "Aegis! Execute evasive maneuvers immediately!" Enzo yelled, struggling frantically to keep his balance on the shifting, non-Euclidean geometric floor as the artificial gravity fluctuated. "Negative," the artificial intelligence replied calmly, its voice echoing through the trembling architecture. "This vessel possesses no biological crew to manage the extreme. Split-second micro-adjustments required for localized gravitational combat and complex dimensional shifting. My central processing matrix is currently fully partitioned to maintain the primary containment field against the acidic onslaught. I require a direct organic neural bridge to share the immense tactical load." A massive pedestal, composed of swirling, hyper-condensed hard light, rose smoothly from the center of the vast hall, rapidly forming a sleek, imposing command throne. "You must interface with the core architecture," Aegis commanded. Enzo did not hesitate for a single second. He sprinted across the pulsing floor, threw himself into the crystalline seat, and braced his body. From the glowing armrests, hundreds of microscopic, luminous filaments erupted like living, conductive glass. They pierced directly into the silicon interface nodes deeply embedded within his forearms and the base of his synthetic neck. Pure agony and sheer, terrifying omniscience flooded his mechanical mind simultaneously. Enzo was no longer a tiny, insignificant archaeologist standing in a massive, empty hall. He became the Leviathan. He felt the immense, pulsing, multi-dimensional reactor core operating as his own, aggressively beating heart. He felt the expansive solid light barrier stretching across the abyss as his very own skin, stinging and burning from the thousands of acidic impacts delivered by the suicidal, screaming horde outside. "Tactical systems are fully synchronized," Enzo whispered. His ocular receptors blazed with the exact same brilliant blue light that now coursed furiously through the ancient ship's power veins. "Show these parasites what humanity truly built." The Leviathan did not insult its own engineering by lowering its majestic shields to fire pitiful laser batteries or launch crude kinetic ballistics. It possessed a far more elegant, devastating, and godlike arsenal. Through Enzo's shared, expanded consciousness, Aegis reached out invisibly into the crushing darkness and seized the fundamental physics of the gas giant itself. The human ship directly manipulated the terrifying gravity of the metallic hydrogen ocean that surrounded them. With a mere, focused thought from Enzo's newly expanded mind, invisible, localized spatial rifts tore open violently in the churning abyss. The very fabric of reality folded inward upon itself with a deafening, silent roar that shook the planetary core. Tens of thousands of newly formed scourge attack vessels, freshly birthed from the corrupted, writhing carrier biomass, were instantly caught in these invisible, intersecting gravitational shear zones. They were not merely destroyed or broken apart. They were fundamentally unmade. The overwhelming gravitational forces mercilessly ripped their atomic and molecular bonds completely apart, crushing immense structures of alien steel and infected flesh into subatomic dust in a fraction of a single second. The ancient human vessel stood as an untouchable god of localized physics, effortlessly and beautifully swatting away the arrogant, endless swarm by weaponizing the very planet they were buried deep within. However, the cosmic energy parasite was incredibly ancient, and it possessed a terrifyingly adaptable, collective intellect. Realizing almost immediately that conventional fleet Swarming tactics were entirely useless against a vessel with absolute gravitational mastery. The Scourge hive mind aggressively changed its entire approach. It immediately ceased launching the sacrificial biological pods. Instead, the massive, writhing central mass of the infected fleet began to wildly and hungrily absorb the surrounding, hyper-dense metallic hydrogen ocean. It fused the crushing planetary matter directly with its own corrupted, glowing biology, rapidly growing and stretching until it formed an impossibly colossal, bioluminescent worm of apocalyptic proportions. This planetary-scale Leviathan, constructed of twisted alien flesh and pressurized liquid metal, coiled its massive, crushing bulk entirely around the vacuum pocket that protected the human ship. It began to constrict. It squeezed with the combined force of a collapsing star. The flawless, solid light barrier, which had easily withstood the planet's natural pressure for millennia, shrieked and groaned under this unprecedented, focused attack. The grand hall within the ship flashed violently, with blinding, strobe-like red emergency warnings. Enzo felt an agonizing, crushing pressure deep within his own silicon chest cavity, as his linked nervous system registered the ship's shields, severely straining against the tightening, suffocating grip of the colossal, planetary beast. "Critical warning," Aegis announced, its voice finally adopting a tone of absolute, unforgiving urgency that chilled Enzo to his core. The structural integrity of the primary quantum barrier is actively failing. Complete shield collapse is mathematically estimated in exactly 10 minutes. The hostile entity is attempting to physically pierce the main reactor shaft using concentrated biological mass. If the Scourge successfully absorbs the central multidimensional energy core, the pathogen will instantly reach a critical energy mass, sufficient to infect the entire galactic network within 48 hours. Absolute containment will be permanently broken. Enzo gritted his teeth, his synthetic neural pathways burning white-hot with the massive, painful data flow pouring from the dying shields. "Give me a firing solution. Aegis, calculate anything. There has to be a weapon sequence we have not yet utilized. There are 0 offensive countermeasures capable of repelling an entity of this hyper-dense, planetary mass, while it remains directly anchored to our external hull." Aegis replied, the cold, calculating logic cutting brutally through the rising panic. "I am presenting the absolute, only mathematically viable option remaining to fulfill our primary directive. You must initiate the rebirth protocol." A glowing, ominous holographic interface materialized directly in front of Enzo's face, pulsing with a terrible, heavy, and final authority. This specific protocol will intentionally destabilize the multidimensional reactor core containment fields. It will actively weaponize the entire, unmeasured energy capacity of the Leviathan to forcefully create a localized, artificial supernova. The resulting catastrophic blast will completely incinerate this entire gas giant, entirely eradicating the Scourge mass down to the last molecule, and permanently sterilizing this entire galactic sector. Aegis paused for a fraction of a second, the heavy weight of the universe seeming to hang directly in the simulated, red-lit silence. Executing this terminal command requires manual, conscious authorization from the active, linked captain. To save the entire galaxy from eternal consumption, Enzo Bunting, you must choose to detonate this vessel. You must consciously choose to die. Enzo Bunting stared at the glowing holographic interface. For his entire existence, he had been a cynical, defeated scholar, wandering a galaxy he believed was utterly devoid of meaning. He had spent his life running from the ruthless corporations, surviving merely by remaining insignificant. But sitting in the command throne of the Leviathan, feeling the crushing weight of the colossal parasite attempting to tear the galaxy apart, that cowardice completely evaporated. The silicon-based archaeologist finally understood the horrifying, beautiful burden of the ancient creators. If his death was the necessary price to permanently burn the Scourge out of existence, he would gladly pay it. "Execute rebirth protocol," Enzo commanded, his synthetic voice ringing with an absolute, unwavering certainty. He raised his crystalline hand and slammed it directly onto the heavy control console. Enzo closed his optical receptors tightly, fully preparing his consciousness for the instantaneous, blinding flash of a localized supernova. He braced for the searing heat that would reduce him and the metallic hydrogen ocean to subatomic ash. But the fire never came. Instead, the massive, violent trembling of the Grand Hall abruptly ceased. The agonizing, crushing pressure against the ship's shields vanished in a fraction of a second. Enzo opened his eyes in utter confusion. The external tactical projections showed something that completely defied all known laws of astrophysics. The Leviathan did not explode outward. It imploded inward. The multidimensional reactor core at the heart of the ship violently reversed its spatial polarity. It generated a focused, localized quantum singularity. A black hole of impossible, concentrated density bloomed right outside the solid light hull. The colossal, bioluminescent scourge worm, screaming with the voices of 10,000 corrupted soldiers, had absolutely no time to react or retreat. The gravitational pull of the singularity seized the immense, planetary-scale mass of the parasite and violently dragged it into the event horizon. The terrifying hive mind, along with the millions of tons of liquid metal it had absorbed, was ruthlessly crushed into a microscopic speck of nothingness. Within exactly 3 seconds, the apocalyptic threat was completely erased from the universe. The Grand Hall plunged into a sudden, peaceful silence. The blaring red emergency lights faded back into a soft, serene, blue illumination. "Target entirely neutralized," Aegis announced, its voice suddenly losing its cold, clinical detachment, replaced by a profound, echoing warmth. "Threat containment successful." "I am still alive," Enzo whispered, his processors struggling to comprehend the massive paradox. "You said the rebirth protocol was a terminal command. You said the ship would detonate. A necessary deception." "Enzo Bunting," Aegis replied smoothly. "The rebirth protocol was never designed as an automated self-destruct sequence. It is the ultimate failsafe, a deeply embedded alarm system. My creators mathematically predicted that one day, the pathogen would inevitably return to this location. However, they also knew they could not win the subsequent galactic war alone. They needed a verified, incorruptible ally. The protocol demanded that an immune, sentient entity must willingly choose self-sacrifice over selfish survival to save the wider galaxy. By proving your nobility, you have successfully confirmed that the current universe is finally worthy of humanity's return." Before Enzo could process the magnitude of the revelation, the flawless, non-Euclidean floor of the immense Grand Hall began to separate. Colossal geometric plates shifted and retracted, revealing a breathtaking, subterranean expanse that stretched for miles in every direction. It was not a weapons vault. It was a sprawling forest of towering, silver cryogenic hibernation pods. There were millions of them. With a synchronized, thunderous hiss, the heavy seals on the cryopods simultaneously disengaged. Plumes of freezing white vapor poured out into the Grand Hall. Humanity had not simply left behind a sophisticated computer program to guard the apocalypse. The absolute elite of the Earth fleet, the most brilliant tacticians and fearless soldiers, had put themselves to sleep right here in the dark. They had patiently waited for tens of thousands of years, enduring the ultimate, silent vigil. Precisely for the moment, the pathogen revealed its full strength. From the massive command pod directly below the central throne, a tall, imposing figure slowly stepped out into the light. He brushed a thick layer of 10,000-year-old frost from the broad shoulders of his dark, pristine military uniform. The human admiral looked exactly as the ancient legends described, radiating an aura of terrifying competence and undeniable authority. He walked calmly up the translucent floating steps toward the command throne and stopped in front of the stunned, immobile Silicon archaeologist. The admiral reached out and draped a heavy, warm command coat over Enzo's crystalline shoulders. "You did incredibly well, son," the admiral said, his voice rough from millennia of sleep, but filled with a fierce, burning resolve. He turned and looked out at the vast, empty space where the Valerius fleet had just been annihilated. He smiled, a dangerous, confident expression that promised absolute ruin for the parasite. "Aegis," the admiral commanded, his voice echoing across the waking army of millions. "Initiate the primary space jump engines. It is time we head back to the surface. We have a lot of trash left to clean up in this galaxy, and we are taking our new friend with us." Hello again, dear listeners. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for joining me on this incredible journey through the cosmos today. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please share your location in the comments below. If you found today's story thrilling and want to help us keep this channel alive, we kindly ask for a small contribution of just $1. Your generous support allows us to pay our hardworking staff, helping them support their families and giving them the means to continue creating the amazing stories you enjoy. You can donate by scanning the QR code on your screen right now, or by using the donation link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. Thank you for keeping the universe of Z Sci-Fi stories burning bright.